The station hung in space like a glass lantern. It was enormous, wider than most cities on Earth. And it turned slowly in the dark, catching the light of a distant orange star. Its name was Kaveth Assembly Station, and it had been there for 200 years. In that time, it had seen wars end, new worlds join the Galactic Council, and more arguments between alien species than anyone had ever bothered to count. It was, by almost any measure, the most important place in the known galaxy. Captain Dale Norris had never been here before. He stood at the viewport of the transport shuttle and looked at the station growing larger as they approached, and he felt the particular kind of quiet that comes when something is bigger than you expected. He was 41 years old, with short brown hair going gray at the temples and a face that had spent too much time in recycled ship air. He had served in Earth's Unified Defense Corps for 19 years. He had been stationed on 3 different frontier outposts, had overseen security during 6 diplomatic missions, and had never once been asked to do anything this strange. His second-in-command, Lieutenant Carol Vance, stood a few steps behind him. She was looking at the station, too, but her expression gave nothing away. She was like that, steady, quiet, the kind of person who thought carefully before she said anything. Dale had worked with her for 4 years and trusted her more than almost anyone he knew. "Any idea what this is actually about?" she asked. "They said diplomatic escort," Dale told her. "But that's not what this is." Carol said nothing. She already knew that, too. The summons had come directly from the Council's Office of Interspecies Affairs, which was unusual. Escort assignments came through the Corps Command. They did not come through the Council. And they certainly did not come with a personal message from the High Chancellor herself, Elder Vaughn of the Sorveth people, asking Captain Norris to arrive in full-dress uniform and bring no more than 15 personnel. The shuttle docked. A council aide, small, pale blue with large amber eyes, met them at the airlock and walked them through corridors that smelled faintly of something warm and unfamiliar. The station was alive with movement. Species Dale had only seen in briefing files passed by in the halls. Tall, bone-white figures with 4 arms. A cluster of small, gray beings moving in perfect unison, yet like a single mind in multiple bodies. Something vast and slow that took up most of one corridor and seemed not to notice the humans pressing themselves against the wall to let it pass. They were brought to a waiting chamber outside the main assembly hall and told to sit. They sat for 40 minutes. Dale did not find this unusual. He had spent a significant portion of his career waiting. When the doors finally opened, what was inside was not what he expected. The assembly hall of Kaveth Station was a vast circular room with tiered seating arranged around a central floor. 17 sections, 1 for each member species of the Galactic Council. Every section was occupied. Every delegate, ambassador, and senior advisor of every species in the council was present. Hundreds of beings in 17 shapes and 17 colors, all looking at the same small group of humans walking through the main door. Dale kept his pace steady. Beside him, Carol did the same. Behind them, the 12 other members of their detail walked in 2 columns, quiet and straight. None of them looked around nervously. None of them whispered. They walked to the center of the floor and stopped, and Dale looked up at the High Chancellor's seat at the top of the hall. Elder Vaughn was old, very old by any species measure. The Sorveth people lived long lives, and Vaughn had spent most of hers in this hall. She was small and thin, wrapped in dark robes, with pale silver skin and eyes the color of deep water. She looked at Dale for a moment without speaking. Then she leaned forward and addressed the hall in the common tongue, the shared language that all council species learned. "This council has functioned for 200 cycles," she said. "In that time, it has been protected by the Varathi Guard, whose strength and discipline were without question. That protection failed 11 cycles ago, during the Olvec ceasefire negotiations, when a rogue telepath subdued a Varathi guard and turned him against this chamber. 3 delegates were injured. The negotiations collapsed. The consequences lasted years. She paused. We will not allow that to happen again. The question before this council today is not whether we need new guardians. We do. The question is who. A voice rose from the Zorathi section. The Zorathi were tall beings with 4 eyes and thick, dark-scaled skin. Their ambassador, a figure named Kreth Vol, spoke with the flat precision of someone who had made this argument before. We have reviewed the proposal from the Sorveth delegation, he said. We oppose it. The species being considered the humans have been members of this council for 60 years. 60 years. The Vorathi served for 2 centuries before they were trusted with this appointment. Beyond their inexperience, humans are emotionally unpredictable. They are a species that spent thousands of years making war against themselves. They are volatile by nature. To place them between this council and its enemies is not security. It is a different kind of risk. There was a sound through the hall. Not agreement exactly, but a general stirring, the kind that meant many species were thinking the same thing and waiting to see who would say it next. Dale stood in the center of the floor and listened. He did not react. For he had been in enough rooms where people were deciding his fate to know that the worst thing he could do right now was make himself the subject of the conversation. He let them talk. Several more ambassadors spoke. Some were less harsh than Kreth Vol, but made similar points. Humans were too young, too emotional, too unpredictable. One delegate from the Scythari people, crystalline beings that communicated in soft harmonic tones, translated by a small device at their collar, noted gently that the human history of conflict was not necessarily a mark against them, but that the council required certainty, and certainty about humans had not yet been established. The only ambassador who said nothing was a small, quiet figure in the Kashari section. Dale noticed her because she was the only one in the room who was watching his team rather than the speakers. She was studying them the way a person studies something they are trying to understand. He filed that away. When the last voice settled, Elder Vaughn raised one thin hand and the room went quiet again. This council will not vote today, she said. A vote without evidence is simply preference. Captain Norris and his team will be assigned to the outer security perimeter of this station during the upcoming closed session between the Sorveth and Kashari delegations. The session begins in 2 cycles. What happens during that assignment will inform this council's decision. She looked down at Dale one more time. Captain, you will be given everything you need. What you do with it is yours to determine. The hall began to empty. Dale stood still until most of the delegates had gone. Then he turned to Carol, who was already looking at him. 2 cycles, she said quietly. 2 cycles, he agreed. Behind them, Sergeant Pete Alderman, a broad, calm man from Ohio, who had the unhurried manner of someone who had never once panicked in his life, spoke up from the back of the group. So we're auditioning, he said. Something like that, Dale said. Pete nodded slowly. All right, he said. Let's not mess it up. From somewhere near the back of the group, Leon Hayes, 23 years old, the youngest on the team, from New Orleans, with quick eyes and a habit of noticing things no one else noticed, looked around at the enormous empty hall and said nothing. He was already paying attention to the room. Old habits. The council aide reappeared at the door to lead them to their quarters. Dale followed, already thinking through what he knew about the Kashari dissident reports, the station layout, and the particular challenge of guarding a room full of beings he had never met, against threats he had not yet seen, with an entire galaxy watching to see what humans would do when it mattered. He had 2 cycles to be ready. He intended to use every hour. Dale spent both preparation cycles doing what he always did before an assignment. He walked the ground. He walked every corridor near the council chambers. He walked the outer perimeter, the service halls, the maintenance access points. He read the station's layout files twice, then walked it again. Carol worked the intelligence side, to pulling every available report on the Kashari dissident group that had been flagged by Council security. She spread the files across a table in their temporary quarters and did not sleep much. By the time the closed session was 12 hours away, Dale knew the station well enough that he could close his eyes and trace every route from Gate 7 to the main chamber floor. He briefed his team that evening. All 14 of them sat in a circle on the floor of the quarters. There were not enough chairs, and he talked them through every access point, every blind corner, every place a person could hide if they did not want to be found. Sergeant Pete Alderman took notes on a small pad. Specialist Nina Grant asked 3 questions, all of them good. Corporal Leon Hayes sat cross-legged at the edge of the circle and said nothing. But Dale noticed that he was not looking at the floor plan on the screen. He was watching the rest of the team. Leon was always watching people. Dale had once asked him why, and Leon had said he found people more useful than maps because maps did not change their minds in the middle of things. Dale had thought about that for a while afterward. The session began at first light cycle. The Sorveth and Kashari delegations entered the main chamber under the watch of council staff, and Dale's team took their positions on the outer perimeter. 4 at the main corridor junctions, 3 in the service level below, 2 at the external docking ring. Carol at the central comm point where she could reach anyone on the team in under 3 seconds. Dale moved between positions, checking, watching, thinking. The first 2 hours were quiet, the kind of quiet that has weight to it. Dale had felt it before, on assignments that turned out to matter. The station was mostly empty. Non-essential staff had been cleared from the perimeter zone as a precaution. And the corridors had that particular stillness of a place waiting for something to happen. At the start of the 3rd hour, Leon's voice came over the comm. Quiet, no urgency, the way Leon always talked. Gate 7. Maintenance crew just badged in. 3 individuals. Uniforms look right, but the second one is moving wrong. Dale was already moving. Moving wrong how? Too careful, Leon said. Real maintenance workers don't watch their own feet when they walk. This one does. Dale came around the corner into the Gate 7 corridor 30 seconds later. The 3 figures in maintenance uniforms were 40 meters ahead, walking toward the inner access door. Dale slowed his pace and kept to the right side of the corridor, his hand near but not on his sidearm. Behind him, Pete Alderman appeared from the opposite junction without being called. Pete had been listening and had moved on his own. Dale spoke in a normal, pleasant voice. Hey, hold up a second. 2 of the 3 figures stopped and turned. The third kept walking faster now. Pete was already past Dale in 4 long, unhurried strides. He did not run. He simply covered distance efficiently and stepped in front of the 3rd figure before the figure reached the door. He stood there with his arms at his sides, not threatening, just present, the way a wall is present. The captain asked you to hold up, Pete said. The 3rd figure stopped. Dale reached the first 2 and looked at them carefully. But the credentials on their badges were real, that was clear. Council security would have let them through any automated checkpoint without question. But the badges were too new. No scratches, no worn edges. Maintenance badges on a station this old looked like they had been through a lot. These looked like they had been printed recently. Who issued your work order today? Dale asked, in the same pleasant voice. The first figure gave a number. Dale did not know if it was right or wrong, but Carol was on the comm before he finished speaking. That work order number is for the waste processing level, she said in his earpiece. Not Gate 7. Dale nodded slowly. Okay, he said. We're going to step into the side room here and talk for a minute. He was not pointing a weapon. He was not raising his voice. He was stating a fact. Yeah, the way you tell someone the time of day. It was at that moment that the 4th infiltrator came out of the ventilation service panel 12 meters back down the corridor. Leon was already there. Nobody had told him to go there. He had gone because he had noticed, 2 hours earlier during his first walk of the zone, that the ventilation panel's locking bolt was scratched in a way that suggested it had been opened recently from the inside. He had not mentioned it in the briefing because he had not been certain. He had simply kept it in mind and watched. He stepped out of the shadow beside the panel the moment the fourth figure emerged, and he put one hand on the figure's shoulder before they had time to react. "Easy," he said quietly. "Just come with me." All 4 infiltrators were in the side room within 4 minutes. None of them had been harmed. None of them had been able to reach the inner access door. Pete stood guard. Nina sealed the 3 nearest access corridors from the inside using the maintenance panel codes she had memorized from the station files. She had read them 2 nights ago, not because she expected to need them, but because she read everything when she had time. Dale sat down across from the 4 infiltrators and looked at them. They were Kashari, young, afraid. One of them was shaking. Dale looked at that one for a moment and felt something he recognized. Not sympathy exactly, but understanding. Whoever had sent these 4 had sent people who were not soldiers. They were believers in a cause, which was a different thing and often a sadder one. "Nobody is going to hurt you," Dale said. "What? Sit down." The whole operation had taken 11 minutes. In the main chamber, the Sorveth and Kashari delegations continued their session without interruption. Neither side knew anything had happened. The session ended 4 hours later with a preliminary agreement, the first formal document both species had signed in over 30 years. Elder Vaughn had watched the entire Gate 7 sequence through the security feed in her private office. She had a cup of warm Sorveth tea that she had not touched. When it was over, she leaned back in her chair and stayed there for a long time without moving, thinking about what she had seen and what it meant. She thought about the moment Pete Alderman had the 3rd infiltrator directly in front of him, within arm's reach, clearly identified as a threat, and had not reached for his weapon. She thought about Leon Hayes standing in the shadow of a ventilation panel for 2 hours because of a scratched bolt. She thought about Dale Norris sitting down across from frightened prisoners and telling them no one was going to get hurt. She thought about the Zorathi ambassador's words in the assembly hall. Emotionally unpredictable, volatile by nature. Elder Vaughn picked up her tea. It had gone cold. She drank it anyway. Word moved through the station the way word always moves through a contained space, quickly and in every direction at once. By the time Dale's team had filed their incident report and returned to quarters, the story of Gate 7 had already reached most of the delegations. By the following morning, the council aide who had met them at the airlock on their first day was at their door again, politely informing Captain Norris that several delegations had requested a meeting. It was not the kind of meeting Dale had been to before. There were no tables, no formal chairs, no assigned seating by species. It was held in one of the station's open observation lounges, a wide, low-ceilinged room with long, transparent walls that looked out into deep space. 11 species had sent a representative. They filed in and arranged themselves around the room in small groups, and Dale stood in the center with Carol at his side and felt, for a moment, like something in a museum. The first question came from the Kashari observer, the same quiet figure Dale had noticed in the assembly hall, the one who had been watching his team rather than the speakers. Up close, she was smaller than he expected, with copper-colored skin and large, dark eyes that moved very precisely, the way a person's eyes move when they are recording everything. Her name, the aide had told him, was Sarath. She was not an ambassador. She was something more like a scholar. "The 4 individuals at Gate 7, Sarath said. Your soldier, the large one, had the 3rd one completely within his control. Why did he not use lethal force?" Dale glanced at Pete, who was standing near the wall. Pete looked back at him with an expression that said he was happy for Dale to answer. "Because the situation did not require it," Dale said. "They were contained. No one in the chamber was in immediate danger. Lethal force when it is not necessary is just harm for no reason. Sarath tilted her head. But the protocol of most guardian species is to treat a confirmed infiltration as a lethal threat by definition. The Vorathi operated that way. I know, Dale said. We don't. There was a brief silence. From the far side of the room, the Scythari ambassador spoke. The Scythari were crystalline beings. Their bodies were made of something between living tissue and mineral, and when they moved, there was a faint sound like glass settling. They communicated through harmonic tones that their translation device converted into words. The Scythari ambassador's name translated roughly as a chord, several sounds at once, but the translation device rendered it as Arev. We would understand, Arev said slowly, if the decision to avoid lethal force was a regulation. A rule your core requires you to follow. But you said the situation did not require it. That is a judgment. Who taught your soldiers to make that judgment? Dale thought about this for a moment. He wanted to give an honest answer, not a political one. Nobody sat them down and taught it as a lesson, he said. It comes from experience, from having been in situations where force was used when it didn't need to be, and watching what happened afterward, from losing people, from making mistakes. He paused. Every person on my team has a reason they think carefully before they act. Most of those reasons are personal. Arev was still. Then, you mean they carry grief? Yes, Dale said. And you consider that an asset? I consider it accurate, Dale said. A guard who has never suffered doesn't recognize suffering fast enough to change course when it matters. My team can read a situation, not just the threat, but the person behind the threat. That gives them more options than a guard who only knows one response. The Kashari observer Sarath was writing something on a small device. The Zorathi representative, not Kreth Vol, but a younger aide who had been sent in his place, was frowning. He spoke carefully. The Kashari warrior caste operates on the complete removal of personal feeling during combat. The Vorathi did the same. You are describing the opposite approach. You are saying your soldiers are better guards because they feel more. I'm saying they make better decisions because they understand more, Dale said. Feeling and thinking aren't separate things for us. We don't train humans to turn one off so the other can work. We train them to use both at the same time. This produced a longer silence. Dale could not tell if the room was convinced or simply confused. Probably both. Carol, who had said nothing for the entire meeting, spoke from his side. Her voice was quiet and even. We don't guard the chambers to show you we're strong, she said. We guard them so that no one in there has to be. The room was very still. Dale looked at her. Carol was watching the window. The Scythari ambassador raised one crystalline hand and pressed it briefly to its translation device. The gesture, the aide later told Dale, was the Scythari equivalent of writing something down so it would not be forgotten. The meeting ended without ceremony. The representatives left in small groups, speaking quietly among themselves. Dale and Carol walked back through the corridor toward their quarters, and neither of them said anything for a while. Back on Earth, things were moving in a different direction. The news of the Gate 7 incident had been transmitted through diplomatic channels, and from there it had reached the public. The reaction was not what the Council might have expected from a species being offered one of the most honored appointments in the galaxy. Humans argued about it, loudly and from many different sides. Some said accepting the appointment would make Earth a target, that guarding the Council meant being the first thing any enemy of the Council would attack. Others said it was a trap, that the older species were using humans as a convenient tool because they were new enough to be manipulated. Some simply asked whether humans were really ready for something this large, and whether it was wise to say yes before they were sure. The Council's intelligence office picked up fragments of these debates through public broadcasts and diplomatic communications. They compiled a report and brought it to Elder Vaughn. She read it in her office with a pot of warm tea and a window full of stars. The report was meant to be a concern, a sign that human society was uncertain and fractured on the question. Several council advisors had flagged it as evidence that the species lacked the unified confidence required for a role of this magnitude. Elder Vaughn put the report down and looked out the window for a long time. Then she called her senior advisor in and told him to file the report in the evidence column, not the concerns column. He asked her why. She said that a species will the vote on human guardianship was scheduled for the following cycle. The council had met to confirm the time, the order of speakers, and the process for counting. It was, by all appearances, a formality at that point. Elder Vaughn had quietly made clear where the decision was heading, and even the Zorathi delegation had gone unusually silent in the preceding days, which was its own kind of signal. Dale's team had spent the morning on a routine patrol rotation. Nothing unusual. The station felt calm. Leon had gone back to the card game he had started with the Kashari prisoners. The transfer paperwork was delayed, which was typical of council bureaucracy, and Leon had found them again in the holding room and picked up where they left off. Pete was running maintenance checks on their gear. Nina was in the station's small library, reading, because that was what Nina did when she had free time. The device activated at the 14th hour of the light cycle while Dale was eating lunch. He did not hear it. He did not see it. What he noticed was that Carol, who was sitting across the table from him, stopped mid-sentence and put her hand to her temple. Then she slid sideways off her chair. Dale caught her before she hit the floor. She was breathing. He checked that first. But she was completely unconscious, her body limp, her eyes closed. Around him, in the small canteen, 4 other people had dropped at the same moment. His comm went active all at once. 6 voices, then silence. Then nothing. Dale was on his feet and moving before he had fully formed a thought. He checked the 2 people nearest to him, breathing. Unconscious, no visible injury. And then he was in the corridor. The corridor was full of bodies. Council staff, maintenance workers, alien delegates who had been walking between meeting rooms. Every single being on the floor or slumped against the wall, all of them unconscious, all of them breathing, none of them responding to anything. Dale found Pete in the east corridor, sitting against the wall with his legs straight out in front of him and his eyes open but unseeing. Dale shook him hard. Pete did not respond. Dale checked his pulse, strong and steady. He moved on. He found Leon still in the holding room with the Kashari prisoners. All 5 of them were on the floor. The prisoners unconscious, and Leon standing in the middle of the room looking down at them with an expression of quiet shock. Leon was the only being in the room still on his feet. "You're okay," Dale said, more relief in his voice than he intended. "Yeah," Leon said. "What happened?" Dale did not know yet, but he was already thinking about it. He found Nina in the library, standing in the middle of the room surrounded by unconscious beings, holding a book she had apparently been reading when it happened. She lowered the book when Dale came in. "I felt something," she said, "like a pressure. And then everyone just went down." 4 of Dale's team were unaffected. The rest were unconscious but stable, their vital signs normal. Every alien being on the station, everyone, was down. Dale did a fast mental count. 17 delegations, council staff, maintenance crews, security personnel, hundreds of beings, all incapacitated, and somewhere on this station, the device was still running. Nina found it first, not because she was the smartest person in the room, though she was very smart, but because she had spent 2 off-duty cycles 3 weeks earlier reading Olvec engineering manuals out of curiosity. She had found them in the station's digital archive while looking for something else, and she had read them the way she read everything, completely, carefully, without skipping anything. And so when Dale described the symptoms and the sudden onset, she said, without any particular drama, Resonance emitter. OLVEC design. The frequency targets complex neural tissue. That's why we're fine. Human neural architecture runs at a different base frequency. I know what to look for. Dale looked at her. Can you shut it down? I need to find it first, she said. That what followed was 4 hours of work in a dark and silent station. The power had partially failed when the device activated, an automated response to the emergency signal that had never been properly completed because the automated systems needed living operators. The corridors were lit only by backup emergency strips, long orange lines of light along the floor that made the station look different, quieter, more serious. Dale sent Leon to move the most vulnerable of the unconscious delegates to the shielded medical bays. Leon worked alone for most of it, moving beings much larger than himself carefully, one at a time. Elder Vaughn was in the main corridor outside the assembly hall. She had fallen there, probably walking to her office. She was very small and very cold. The temperature systems had begun to fail with the power, and the Sorvith people did not tolerate cold well. Leon took off his jacket and wrapped it around her. Then he picked her up carefully and carried her to the nearest medical bay and set her down on the closest surface and checked her breathing. He sat with her for 2 minutes before he went back for the next one. Dale and Nina worked through the station level by level. Nina had a rough idea of where the emitter would need to be placed to achieve maximum dispersal, and she was right. They found it in a sealed utility junction on the 3rd service level, bolted to a structural beam, humming quietly in the dark. It was small, the size of a toolbox. It looked ordinary. "Give me 12 minutes," Nina said. Dale stood at the junction door and watched the corridor while she worked. But the station was completely silent, except for the hum of the device and the occasional soft sound of Nina's tools. At the 9-minute mark, the hum changed pitch. At the 11-minute mark, it stopped entirely. Nina came out of the junction carrying the emitter's power core. "Done," she said. Dale called Leon on the comm. "How are we looking?" "Medical bays are full," Leon said. "Everyone I could move is in. Vitals look stable." Dale called each of his 4 conscious team members one by one. They all reported in. Then he said simply, "All right, let's restore what power we can and wait." It took another hour to bring the primary systems back online manually. Dale had never done it before, but the station's emergency manual was in the database and he read it and followed it step by step. The lights came back. All the temperature systems restarted. The medical bay monitors began reporting properly, and then they waited. No calls for help, no distress signal. There was no one to send it to, and no one would have arrived in time anyway. They simply waited in a powered-up station in the middle of deep space, 4 people and their unconscious colleagues and 17 species of incapacitated delegates, in the particular silence of people who have done what needed to be done and are now waiting to see what comes next. The first delegate to open her eyes was Elder Vaughn. She was in the medical bay where Leon had placed her, still wrapped in his jacket. The first thing she saw was a young human soldier sitting quietly in a chair near the door, holding a cup of water, watching to make sure she was all right. And Dale was at the other end of the station when Carol woke up. His comm crackled and her voice came through, groggy but clear. "Dale." "Right here," he said. A pause. "Everyone okay?" He closed his eyes for just a moment. "All 17, he said. The vote was held 3 cycles after the resonance event. The council had needed time to recover, to be examined by medical staff, to sit quietly in their quarters and think. Dale's team gave them that time without asking for anything in return. They continued their patrols. They filed their reports. They ate in the canteen and slept in their quarters, and did their job the same way they had done it from the beginning, as though the fate of the appointment was not decided by what they had done in those 4 dark and silent hours, but by what they did every hour before and after. On the morning of the vote, Dale put on his dress uniform. Carol stood at the mirror beside him, adjusting her collar, and for a moment they looked at each other in the reflection, and neither of them said anything. There was nothing to say that the other did not already know. The assembly hall was full again, the same 17 sections, the same hundreds of faces, but the feeling in the room was different from the first day. The first day had felt like a debate. This day felt like a conclusion that had already been reached and simply needed to be spoken aloud. The vote was unanimous. It was the first unanimous vote the Galactic Council had cast in 200 years. Every species, all 17, in favor. The result was read by Elder Vaughn from the High Chancellor's seat in the even, an unhurried voice of someone who was not surprised, but was deeply satisfied. Humanity was appointed guardian species of the Council chambers. No fixed term, no trial period, no conditions. By common accord of all 17 member species of the Galactic Council, the responsibility was given to the people of Earth 60 years into their membership, the youngest species in the room by almost any measure. The Zorathi ambassador, Kreth Vol, cast his vote last. The hall was already unanimous by the time it came to him, so his vote changed nothing in terms of the outcome. But the words he entered into the official record were noted by every species present. The record read simply, "They had every reason not to. That is sufficient." The ceremony was brief. Dale accepted the formal document, a flat thing printed on material he did not recognize, covered in 17 signatures in 17 different scripts, and thanked the council. He kept his remarks short. He said that his team would do their best. He said it without flourish, the way a person states a plan they intend to keep. Afterward, the hall emptied slowly. Dignitaries lingered to speak with each other. The council aide found Leon Hayes in the atrium, where he was explaining the rules of a card game to a young Sorvith diplomatic aide who had approached him shyly, curious about what humans did to pass the time during long guard shifts. Leon was showing her how to hold the cards so the other person could not see them. The Sorvith aide was concentrating very hard and getting it slightly wrong, and Leon was patient about it. Nina Grant received her permanent posting papers before the ink on the formal document was dry. She sent a message home that was 3 sentences long, which was about as long as Nina ever made anything. She said she had been posted to Kaveth Assembly Station. She said the work was good. She said she had found a library. Pete Alderman filed a maintenance request for new gear before the ceremony was even over because some of the equipment had taken wear during the resonance event, and Pete did not like using anything that was not in proper order. The council aide who received the request was momentarily confused. It was the first maintenance request the office had ever received from a Guardian unit, and then she processed it without comment. Carol Vance accepted her permanent posting. She sent one message home, and it said, "I think this is where I'm supposed to be." That was all. It was later that evening that Elder Vaughn found Dale alone. She did not make an appointment. She simply appeared in the small side corridor off the main chamber, where Dale was sitting on a low bench eating a ration pack. He had not had time for a real meal, and had stopped here because it was quiet, and no one would ask him anything for a few minutes. His dress jacket was folded beside him. He looked up when she appeared and started to stand. She raised one thin hand. "Please," she said, "sit." She sat beside him on the bench. For a while they were both quiet, which was fine. Dale had learned by now that Elder Vaughn did not fill silence with noise. When she spoke, her voice was low and unhurried. "I want to ask you something," she said. "And I want an honest answer. Not a diplomatic one." "All right," Dale said. "The night of the resonance event," she said. "Your team was alone on this station. Every delegate was incapacitated. The council chamber was empty. Every seat, every signing authority, every decision-maker in the galaxy was either unconscious or unable to act. No one was watching. No one would have known." She looked at him. "It was the greatest opportunity for political advantage that any species has ever been handed. You could have taken documents, changed records, made contacts, planted information. You could have altered the vote that happened today. You could have done almost anything. Why didn't you? Dale was quiet for a moment. He looked at the ration pack in his hands and thought about the question seriously because it deserved a serious answer. "Oh, it didn't occur to us," he said finally. Elder Vaughn watched him. "Not because we can't think that way," he said. "Humans are very good at thinking that way. We've been doing it to each other for thousands of years. But my team was not there as representatives of what humanity wants. We were there as guards, and a guard has one job. When the people you are protecting open their eyes, everything should be exactly as it was when they closed them. That's the whole thing. There's nothing else." Elder Vaughn looked at him for a long time. Then she stood, straightened her robes, and said 2 words. "That's why." She walked back down the corridor toward the chamber doors without looking back. Dale watched her go. Then he looked down at his ration pack and finished his meal in the quiet of the corridor. He's alone with the low hum of the station around him and the distant light of stars through a small window at the end of the hall. In the atrium above, the flags of 17 species turned slowly in the filtered light, and beside them, newly raised, an 18th. It was not the largest flag in the row. It was not the most decorated. It turned at the same speed as all the others, at the same height, in the same light. It was enough.